September 23rd meeting of the Santa Barbara Airport Commission, and we will start with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Goodman, Commissioner Arcuri,
Aloha, I'm here.
Commissioner Houghton, Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Commissioner Khan,
Here.
Bowen,
Here.
Chair Hopkins.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Director Thompson, are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair Hopkins, there are no changes to the agenda.
All right, item number 1, notices that on Thursday, September 17th, 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board at the Airport Commission. Item number 2 is public comment. Any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled before them this day. The total amount of time for public comments is 15 minutes. No individual speaker may have more than 3 minutes. Are there any public comments?
Members of the public, if you wish to make a public comment on a matter that is not on the agenda, please inform me that you wish to speak by raising your hand icon on your screen. Do we have anyone who wants to make public comment? Commissioners, we have 8 people signed in. Chair Hopkins, I do not see any hands raised.
Thank you. I will close public comment and go on to liaison reports. Are either of our liaison council members available and wish to speak? Are either of them signed in, Maureen?
Chair Hopkins, I don't see either of them signed in.
All right, then that moves us to item number 4, the director's report. Director Thompson, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. We continue to see improvement in commercial passenger activity at the airport with a steady pattern of growth. While activity remains nearly 70% below 2019 levels and recovery is slower than anticipated, I should say, this pattern is consistent with what airports are seeing across the nation. The importance of this small growth is that it highlights that there is a segment of our community.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
There is a segment of our community that is continuing to travel by air. Most predictions for a full recovery have proven to be inaccurate given the continuing level of uncertainty surrounding this virus and the economy. Therefore, we continue to monitor our growth trends with our airline partners, looking for those triggers that will warrant increased service levels.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
I apologize for interrupting. I just heard the start the broadcast language, which means that it wasn't live through the GoToWebinar for individuals. Can we go back, do a roll call, and
Yes.
just open public comment again really quick?
Okay, Maureen? Okay, Chair Hopkins, why don't you take it from the top?
Okay, we will start again here. I call to order the September 23rd meeting of the Santa Barbara Airport Commission, and we will start with a roll call.
Commissioner Goodman, Commissioner Arcuri,
Aloha, here.
Commissioner Houghton, Commissioner Wilson,
I'm still here.
Commissioner Khan,
Present.
Commissioner Bowen,
Here, and I'd like to report that Dennis texted me. He's had a power failure. He's trying to return.
Chair Hopkins,
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any recent changes to the agenda?
And Chair Hopkins, there are no changes to the agenda.
All right, item number 1, notices that on Thursday, September 17th at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board at the Airport Administration. Item number 2 is public comment. Any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda this evening. The total amount of time for public comment is 15 minutes, and each individual is limited to 3 minutes. Are there any public comments?
Members of the public, if you wish to make a public comment on anything that is not listed on the agenda, please click on the raised hand icon on your screen, and that tells me that you wish to speak. Commissioners, it appears that we have 8 people attending that have registered, and I do not see any raised hand icons.
Thank you very much. At this time, I will close that public comment, and I will ask if either of our city council member liaisons are present and wishing to speak.
Chair Hopkins, it does not appear that either liaison is attending the meeting.
Thank you very much. We will now go back to the director's report and let Director Thompson start again.
Good evening again. We continue to see improvement in commercial passenger activity at the airport with a steady pattern of growth. While activity remains nearly 70% below 2019 levels and recovery is slower than anticipated, this pattern is consistent with what airports are seeing across the nation. The importance of this small growth is that it highlights that there is a segment of our community that is continuing to travel by air. Most predictions for a full recovery have proven to be inaccurate given the continuing level of uncertainty surrounding this virus and the economy. Therefore, we continue to monitor our growth trends with our airline partners, looking for those triggers that will warrant increased service levels. There continues to be strong interest in our market, and an air service will fully recover to 2019 levels as soon as demand warrants. It is with mixed feelings that I report to the Commission that Andrew Bermond, airport planner, has accepted a promotion within the City Parks Department. Andrew served the airport for more than 10 years and was involved in some significant efforts at the airport, including the Master Plan Development Project, environmental compliance, and our capital improvement program. Andrew will be greatly missed, but is only a phone call away. We will be evaluating our options for backfilling this position as soon as possible. I would also like to announce the retirement of Tim Lawton, Education Liaison. Tim worked part-time at the airport for more than 20 years, staffing our visitor center and managing our tour program. Given constraints brought on by COVID-19, it is uncertain when we will commence services at the tour center. However, we do anticipate reactivating these services at some time in the future. And with that, Deanna Zackerson, any comments on business and development?
Yes, thank you, Henry. Good evening, Chair Hopkins and the rest of the commission. Just a couple of notes for you. Perhaps you may have seen the new marketing campaign that we recently launched. Marketing campaign might be a bit of a misnomer because the message with the campaign is really telling folks that when they are ready to travel, we are ready here at the airport to serve them. So it's a message that we think resonates with where the traveling community is right now in Santa Barbara. And we are ready to serve folks when they're ready to fly. And that's really the message that we're looking to convey to folks. On the business development side, air service development, we continue to be very, very active in this area. Perhaps more so than when times are good, you need to be in front of the air carriers and reinforcing your position with them. So we have been working with carriers that currently have halted service with us because of the pandemic. That would be Contour and Delta. And we also continue to work with carriers that are potentially expanding, such as Alaska Airlines with their new service in November, and continuing to talk to carriers that we would like to attract in the future as demand improves. On the property management side, the Super 8 Motel on the corner of Hollister and Fairview has a new owner, and therefore the lease for the parking lot that surrounds that hotel has been assigned to the new owners as well. We are continuing to work on the anticipated relocation of Atlantic Aviation to the north side of the airfield, which is a quite labor-intensive activity. And we are also continuing to speak with one of our longtime tenants, L3 Harris, about their continued tenancy at the airport. And also, as noted in the report, we have a lease that is going to be expiring at the end of October for Spitfire Aviation, and it is not a lease that the airport is intending to renew with that tenant. And I'm happy to take questions about that if you have them. Otherwise, we continue to work to try to manage our tenancies and preserve revenue, increase revenue where we can, and actively manage our budget, which we'll also be talking about a little bit later today. So thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. Aaron Keller, any comments for ops?
Thank you, Henry. Good evening, Commission. No comments on behalf of the Certification and Operations Division.
Thank you, Aaron. Jeff McKee, any comments?
Good evening, Commissioners. The only thing I have to report is my staff's working on repainting taxiway and runway center lines within the next month or so. So you should be seeing those brighten up and be more visible within the next month.
Thank you, Jeff. And that concludes the director's report.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions concerning the director's report? I see Craig Curry's hand raised. Go ahead, Commissioner Curry.
Yeah, Deanna, are you at liberty to disclose who we assigned the lease to in the Super 8 spot?
Yes, good evening, Commissioner Curry. The hotel was purchased by a company based in San Diego, California, a partnership that owns multiple motels in California. It's an LLC. We don't know much more about them other than we've, of course, examined all of their financials and made sure that we can count on that continued revenue stream from them.
Do you, as a follow-up, you know if they, do you have any knowledge of their affiliation or lack thereof with a national brand, you know, Holiday Inn Express or et cetera, or do you have any knowledge of that?
They are, Commissioner Curry, they are an independent owner, but as far as we know, they do intend to continue their license agreement affiliation with Super 8, which has been in place under the previous owners for quite a number of years.
Okay, thanks. And second question, can you add a little bit more color on the decision regarding the Spitfire lease?
Yes, Commissioner Curry. So Spitfire Aviation, their lease is expiring in due course at the end of October. Obviously, normally we would engage with a tenant prior to the expiration to determine whether they're going to continue their tenancy. But two things have really taken place here. One, the aircraft associated with that business relocated in July to Orange County. So there has not been any flight activity out of that flight school. And they have also been delinquent on their rent payments. So, and they are still delinquent on their rent payments. And so therefore they are not a tenant in good standing, and therefore we do not intend to renew the lease.
Okay, thanks, Deanna. That's all I have. Thanks, Chairman.
Before we continue, I would note that Commissioners Goodman and Houghton have joined us. Actually, I think both joined a little bit ago. Are there any other commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Bowen.
Thank you. A question about the facility that would be vacated by Spitfire. Are we marketing that to a flight school still?
I think we're going to be looking at our strategy for flight schools in general. So the short answer is no. We will be taking a look at the need for the use of that facility and how we want to handle flight schools.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners have questions? I have a couple of questions. What was the annual rent approximately that we were getting from Spitfire? Do you know off the top of your head, Deanna?
Excuse me there, Commissioner Hopkins. For a moment there, I pushed on the wrong button. Yes, so the rent was around $30,000 a year for that space.
Okay. And I'm not sure to whom direct this question, but in the long term, looking at the master plan, is that a building that was originally scheduled to stay there or to be torn down at some point?
Commissioner Hopkins, that building is actually intended to stay where it is for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. And the other question, I know we can't go into much detail, but I did notice that the restaurant that you were working on lease for the restaurant, and my only question would be the term. I would hope that we were looking at a term that took into account its future use with our FBOs.
Commissioner Hopkins, I would say it's a little bit premature to say that we are negotiating a lease. We have interest in the building, and we have an individual or a company that has toured the facility a couple of times, so there is interest in it. But it's premature to say what the terms might be in the future, or even if that prospective tenant really is going to follow through with their expressed interest so far.
Thank you. No other questions by commissioners? I will open it for public comments. Maureen, is anybody there raising their hand for public comment?
Members of the public, if you wish to make a comment on the director's report, please use the raised hand icon. Chair Hopkins, I do not see any hands raised.
Then at this time, I will close public comment. One last chance. Any comments by commissioners? All right, we will move on to item 5, the consent calendar. We have 2 items on here. One is the approval of the minutes, and the other is receiving the property management report. Do any commissioners have questions or comments on this consent agenda or wish to pull either of the items? Hearing none, I will open it to public comment. Maureen, once again, anybody with public comment?
Members of the public, I do not see anybody with the raised hand icon engaged. Chair Hopkins, there are no hands raised.
At this time, I will close for public comments and would like a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
I think that was Commissioner Wilson who moved and Commissioner Khan who seconded. I think we need a roll call vote because this is a virtual meeting.
This is a motion made by Commissioner Wilson, seconded by Commissioner Khan for approval of the consent calendar. Commissioner Goodman,
Yes.
Commissioner Arcuri,
Yes.
Commissioner Houghton,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowen,
Yes.
Chair Hopkins.
Yes,
The motion was unanimous.
thank you. We will move on next to the administrative reports, item 7, which is a lease agreement with Coastal Aviation. And I'm going to guess that Deanna is going to speak on this.
Yes, Commissioner Hopkins, Chair Hopkins, that is correct. And thank you, Mo, for putting up the slide presentation. So good evening again, Commissioners. This is a proposed lease for a tenant that I believe we are all well familiar with, Coastal Aviation Inc., which is an aviation maintenance provider. They have been on the field at Santa Barbara Airport for roughly 10 years. The entire time, they have been a subtenant of Signature Flight Support. We talked earlier in the year and towards the end of last year about the desire to see if it was possible to negotiate a direct lease with Coastal Aviation, as opposed to having them as a subtenant to Signature. Obviously, there have been a number of events that have taken place since then, but nonetheless, we have continued to engage in a dialogue with Coastal. Coastal is currently occupying Hangar 15 in the Northeast Hangar facility. So it is the hangar that faces in an easterly direction. And they moved into that facility in mid-2018 in conjunction with Signature leasing that hangar. Coastal would be entering into a direct lease agreement with the airport as of January 1st, and they would lease that entire hangar and roughly 2,600 square feet of adjacent office space. So this is the space that they currently occupy. They would continue providing maintenance service to both jet aircraft, piston aircraft. They have in the past done quite a bit of commercial aviation work. Obviously, in the last number of months, their business has been impacted primarily by the loss of commercial traffic, but they have continued to do a lot of maintenance work for the fractional jet community and other jets that are visiting Santa Barbara. So this would be a 4-year lease with one-year options, so it could be potentially a 5-year lease. They pay $1.08 a square foot to begin with, and then it would be stepped up to $1.14 a square foot in year 2. So the stepped rent rate is really in recognition of giving them a chance to recover business as demand increases for their services, which we anticipate will happen. They also will pay a flat fee for use of the apron in the vicinity of the facility. And as with the other tenants in the Northeast Hangar development, they will pay a common area maintenance charge and their utilities. So I'm happy to entertain any questions about this. This is basically the main parameters of the lease. And then of course you can see on the map here where Coastal is located.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, do any of you have questions? Seeing no questions, I will open it to for public comment. Maureen, please. Maureen, can you please open it for
Pardon me,
public
I didn't
comment?
have my mic on. I'm sorry, Chair. Members of the public, if you would wish to speak on this item, would you please use the raised hand icon to let me know that you wish to speak? Chair Hopkins, there are no raised hand icons from the public.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would entertain a motion and a second to approve this lease.
I so move.
Second.
I think we have a motion by Commissioner Khan and seconded by Vice Chair Bowen.
The motion by Commissioner Khan, seconded by Commissioner Bowen for Administrative Report Number 7, Lease Agreement, Coastal Aviation, Inc., that Airport Commission approve and authorize the Airport Director to execute a 4-year lease agreement plus a 1-year option to extend at Airport's sole discretion with Coastal Aviation, Inc., a California corporation, for approximately 20,000 square feet of Hangar 15 and 2,686 square feet of adjacent office space in Building 244, located at 495 South Fairview Avenue, Santa Barbara, California, effective January 1st, 2021. Initial annual rent will be $298,094, payable in monthly installments averaging $24,841, plus a monthly apron use fee of $500, monthly CAM proportion estimated at $500, and utilities. Commissioner Goodman,
Approve.
Commissioner Arcuri,
Yes.
Commissioner Houghton,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Commissioner Bowen,
Yes.
Chair Hopkins.
Yes,
The motion was unanimous.
thank you very much. The next item is item number 8, the FAA Enforcement and Compliance Update. And this is to receive a report.
Commissioners, item 8 on tonight's agenda is a brief presentation on the status of 3 regulatory and compliance items with the Federal Aviation Administration. As a reminder, the airport is a highly regulated, technical, and complex environment in which we must interact with numerous regulators to ensure the airport operates safely, securely, efficiently, and in a financially responsible manner 24/7. Our interactions, including enforcement and compliance actions, are ongoing and being managed extremely effectively on an administrative level. We share with you tonight these specific compliance issues because of inquiries from a couple of you, but I want to be clear, there is no action needed or required from this body on these items. When there is action needed on any regulatory matter, we will ensure you are well briefed and prepared to take action or make any decision that may be required of you. We have a great partnership with our regulators, and staff is skilled in addressing matters of compliance and enforcement. And with that, I'll hand it over to Aaron Keller to provide a brief presentation.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Thank you, Henry. Commissioners, tonight I wanted to focus on a very high-level overview. There's been a lot of discussion since 2018 when the first letter of questionable compliance was issued by the FAA. And this presentation is intended just to give you a recap since it's been so long since the initial letter was issued. Next slide, please. So before we get into the actual complaint letters, I'd like to take a second to explain the different complaint types when it comes to the FAA's compliance office within the ADO, Airports District Office. The first type of complaint is what we're dealing with now. It's a Part 13 complaint, which is an informal type of complaint or an administrative complaint that is generally initiated by someone who is a user of the facility. Typically, when they bring these complaints to the FAA, they believe that the airport is not complying with grant assurances or other requirements. And the way that they would voice this is either vocally or in writing to the FAA, and is always, most typically, I should say, the first step in the complaint process. And the intent here is that it allows the airport to address this matter, provide the FAA a little bit of background from the airport's perspective, and then additionally, it allows the tenant to provide input once the FAA has ruled on the matter. Next slide, please. And then the second step to that would be a Part 16 complaint. So either A, this has progressed from an informal complaint, or it is a more severe complaint that is clearly a blatant violation. It could result in the airport failing to be responsive to that informal complaint. Simply, if we would receive these Part 13 complaints or the letters that we've received, and we were to dismiss them without response, that would lead directly to a Part 16 complaint. And if it goes to a Part 16, the airport's grant funding is immediately jeopardized by placing it on hold, holding all projects on the airfield until such matters are resolved. Next slide, please. So as it stands today, I mentioned we've received 3 informal complaints since November of 2018. And each of these complaints is in various stages of resolution. It's not an easy process. As you know, we embarked on the discussion of fees for flight instructors. We've just embarked on the minimum standards updates. And all of these require great lengths of time and public comment as we go through the matters. I will say, however, as Henry alluded to, the FAA is pleased with our efforts to resolve these matters. And specifically, they've cited the airport's attitude towards compliance. They understand that we are doing everything within our powers to resolve these matters in a fair and reasonable manner. Next slide, please. So again, just recapping each complaint. Complaint number 1 was filed November 20th, 2018, and it was related to the independent flight instruction fees that the airport was charging. We had an individual on the airfield who alleged that the fee structure does not create a fair playing ground for flight instruction, and therefore the airport may be participating in economic non-discrimination inadvertently as part of the ongoing flight instruction that is occurring. Next slide, please. The second complaint was related to 3 areas of the airport's operation. So 1 being that flying clubs are operating as an alternative to based flight schools. Number 2, that flying clubs purchase aircraft for a very nominal fee from existing flight club members. And then finally, that the airport's visitor center is being utilized free of charge for nonprofit entities, creating an unequal playing ground. Next slide. I apologize. Back to complaint number 2, please. Excuse me. Okay. Complaint number 3. My apologies. And then finally, on July 28, 2020, the airport was advised of a complaint regarding tenants' ability to perform self-service aircraft maintenance in their the tenant's facility. Essentially, we have an FAA grant assurance that advises that the airport must allow self-service maintenance. However, that self-service maintenance only need to be provided if it is compliant with the airport's minimum standards, the rules and regulations, and it doesn't deface the existing facilities or impede other aircraft operators on the airfield. So what we've done in this matter is we've actually proposed to the FAA what we believe and what the FAA has cited will be an acceptable means of compliance, and that if there is something beyond preventative maintenance that needs to be conducted on the airport outside of an approved maintenance facility, that it will be considered on a case-by-case basis. The rationale for that matter will look at stormwater compliance, it will look at fire protection compliance, and it will look at whether or not it would deface the facility. So right now we're working through exactly what those standards would look like, so that way we can evaluate each request for maintenance on an individual case-by-case basis and make an informed decision. That way we can ensure the facility's operation for many years to come. Next slide, please. And this table right here just illustrates each complaint and where it stands in resolution. So complaint number 1 related to the fees for flight instructors. So right now we are reviewing alternatives for addressing all commercial activity on the airport. As you know, we embarked on this minimum standards update prior to the pandemic, and unfortunately that placed us on hold. We've had many discussions, ongoing discussions, I should say, with our regulator and with our consultant related to this matter, as well as taking public feedback, which is shaping the ultimate outcome for how we will resolve this complaint. Complaint number 2 related to flying club compliance. Being that it is being alleged that we are conducting flight training within flying clubs, we've elected to take upon an audit process to determine what appropriate response we need to take for any individual flying club based upon those audit results. That process is still underway. Nothing has been finalized and ongoing discussions continue. And then finally, the third complaint related to self-service maintenance. This complaint has been resolved. Essentially, the verbiage that we spoke to, that anything beyond preventative maintenance as outlined within the Federal Aviation Regulations will be considered on a case-by-case basis, has proven sufficient to close this matter. So I'm happy to report that we are making progress, but there is still progress to be made ahead of us. So with that being said, that concludes the presentation, and we're happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron. Commissioners. That was quick. Karen Khan.
Yes, I'm interested to know in item number 2, what kind of activities were alleged at the visitor center that were objected to?
That it was creating an unequal playing ground, and that certain entities on the airport that are benefiting or perhaps profiting from the use of that facility is creating an unequal playing ground with regard to other tenants on the facility that are paying full lease agreements and are conducting activities on the airport that may be in competition with the entities that are using the visitor center.
Okay, I guess my concern is, since that is a common meeting place for many of the nonprofit pilot groups and other nonprofits, is the objection to those types of users, or is it to someone else using it for another use?
So,
And Commissioner Khan, that's something that, as part of this complaint, we will be reevaluating the use of the visitor center at no cost. That's the real hangup. Is there are some folks that are allowed to use the facility for free or no cost, and the complainant in this case argues that that's an unfair advantage to tenants who are paying for lease space at the airport. So we will be evaluating the use of the visitor center at no cost for all groups. And it's probably the appropriate time for us to take a look at that as well, because we're now in different territory, in the sense that as we allow people to now use the visitor center, after each use, we're now going to have to do a much deeper clean than we've done in the past, which adds more cost to the airport to make that facility, clean and disinfected for the next user. So it's probably a good time for us to evaluate the cost of allowing that to be used for free. There are no other facilities in the city of Santa Barbara that are permitted to be used for free. So it's probably a good thing for us to look at as well.
My question would only be that a number of these groups do nothing more than hold a meeting there. Do I assume correctly that's not the objection? The objection is when there are activities that compete with those tenants who actually pay rent to perform a similar type of service.
That is correct, but we're going to have to look at all users. So we have to treat everyone fairly. And that's where the challenge comes in. We can't allow some folks to use it at no cost and, begin to charge a fee to others. Again, there's going to be additional costs for the airport, so there's good reason for us to look at this.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Back on mute, Commissioner Arcuri. Yes, go ahead.
The first issue that Aaron showed on his chart in red, which I'll refer to just as the flight training, the complaint that dates back to 2018. We're 2 years beyond that now, and I readily acknowledge that the airport staff and the airport and the FAA and every single one of us for the last 7 or 8 months have not been operating in the most efficient manner. In terms of this process, which I have a two-part question, without revealing, private conversations that happen with various FAA folks, not unofficially, but kind of off to the side. The first part of my question is, and I'll ask both and then ask Henry to respond. Do you feel like the FAA feels like we are, and you may have said this, and I apologize if I'm re-asking, do you feel like the FAA feels like you are coming to conclusion or the goal line on that, number one? And number two, and I'm sure you love these types of questions, especially under the current environment, do you have an idea how far that goal line is in the future, time-wise?
Commissioner Arcuri, I would answer the first part by saying absolutely. The FAA is very comfortable, very happy with how the Santa Barbara Airport is handling these issues. They understand a lot of these issues are very complex, highly technical, and it takes a lot, to maneuver some of these. And you're not always going to make people happy, but you have to do what's in the best interest of the airport. And we have to make sure that we're in compliance by being fair and reasonable to all of our tenants. And, as far as the conclusion, I would venture to say that we're working as swiftly as we possibly can. The first complaint that we received back in November in 2018, that issue has been worked on actually for about 3 or 4 years. And when I arrived here in February of 2019, I committed to resolving that matter. And we have been moving in that direction. It's very, very challenging and difficult, but I think we're moving in the right direction. Is it moving as quickly as I would like? No, but I think we are making progress in the right direction. The other two, I think we've addressed them in a very timely manner, and they've been resolved fairly quickly.
Thank you, Director Thompson.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question.
Oh, yes, Councilman Freeman.
Sorry for being late. I had a prior meeting at the Commercial Fishermen Subcommittee, so I'm going from the sea to the air tonight. So I just had a comment actually regarding the issue of the fees for the visitor center. Just as you're going through that, and I appreciate you taking the time to explain the reasoning behind that, Mr. Thompson, and the approach you're taking. And one thing is, as you're doing it, is looking at rates is for nonprofit use, different rates. I know that the library and parks have a good system up, which I'm sure you're looking at, but I just wanted to just appreciate that you're looking into that and different models that we have at the city that could be beneficial. I'm happy to talk with you about some of the ones that I'm aware of as well.
Thank you for that. And absolutely, we will be looking at that. The visitor center is currently closed due to the pandemic. So we are taking this time to begin to look at the best approach forward with it. But recognizing once it reopens, we will be operating in a completely different world and how that facility is used. So we will try and take the best approach possible, and we'll look at what the best practice is within the city.
Thank you. No more questions by the commissioners. We'll open it for public comment. Maureen, please.
Members of the public, if you wish to make a public comment on this item, please use the raised hand icon on your screen to let me know that you wish to speak. And Chair Hopkins, I see no raised hand icons.
Thank you very much. Let's see. This was a receive, so there is no vote. So we will go to subject item number 9, which is Airport FY 2021 budget process recap and a status update.
Commissioners, tonight we will present to you a budget presentation as requested through a motion initiated by 2 members at the last commission meeting. I'm happy to see my commission express interest in our budget and financial position, because I think it's important that this commission understand the need for staff to be able to focus on efforts that contribute to the financial strength of the airport, and that staff are not constantly distracted from these critical revenue generating duties necessary to meet our financial needs and obligations. But I do want to appeal to this body that attempts to drive the agenda through such motions are not terribly productive, and in fact serve only to distract staff from higher priority tasks. We're happy to share our financial position, and I'm proud to highlight the hard work that staff has been doing and the difficult decisions we have made to get here. And it has not been easy for us. This year's budget process was not a normal process because COVID-19 did not allow for a normal budget process. Our finances are well managed, but not done so in a bubble. Between our airline partners agreeing to the rates and charges in the budgets themselves, city finance staff support, city administrative review, and city council approval, there have been many eyes on the numbers. In a normal year, we would have brought our proposed budget to the full airport commission before taking it to city council. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we were only able to bring it before the commission budget subcommittee before taking it to city council. But in that budget subcommittee, Commissioner Hopkins and Vice Chair Bowen attended the meeting and provided comment and seemingly understood the uncharted territory of COVID-19 we were about to enter into. And we didn't know exactly where we were headed. But I want to be clear, we have met our obligation to share our financial position with this body. And it is important that we do that. Each of you have been receiving regular financial and budgetary information despite of and throughout the pandemic. The commission has been aware of projected revenue shortfalls and supplemental funding we received in the way of a $9.5 million CARES Act grant, and how we intended to use those funds. The commission has also received our revised budgets that went before City Council, which included a detailed budget reduction plan of more than $2.6 million in cuts for FY21. I would argue that this year, rightfully so, you have already received much more budget and financial information than you normally receive or need to carry out your duty. However, we are not out of the woods. Hard decisions are ahead, and much of that is driven by continued uncertainty. So tonight, as we pause to take another review of information that has already been provided, other issues cannot be brought forward because providing tonight's presentation requires significant staff time and attention to bring this to you. You may recall that much of the heavy lifting in developing and managing our budget was typically handled by our budget analyst, Tom Bullers, who resigned more than a year ago. So this year, that momentous effort fell on staff to pick up, and their performance was excellent, all things considered. But make no mistake, this was significant extra work for all of us. I agreed to this presentation tonight so that we can move on and continue to prepare agendas that your professional staff feels are a priority for you to take action on. While we continue to manage the details of our current budget almost on a daily basis, we continue efforts to close out FY20's budget. And we've commenced the budget process for FY22 and 23, which in the near term will also come with significant uncertainty. The point is, we are significantly engaged in our budget and finances, and staffing time is at a premium. Finally, our budget is already approved and is being managed in real time. Therefore, there is no action before you tonight on this budget. This presentation is simply a recap of what has occurred and what you have already been presented with. And with that, I will hand it over to Deanna Zachrison for a brief presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Henry. Good evening again, commissioners. As Henry mentioned, this is a bit of a recap and a forward-looking, as much as we can tell, of course, of looking ahead to our budget in the coming year. So if you could go to the next slide, Mo, that would be very helpful. All right, so as you might suspect, this year's budget process started off pretty much like most others, with the exception of the fact that we already at that point had lost Tom Bullers, as Henry mentioned. And so the work was largely being handled by other aviation staff and some additional help from the city finance department. So the work started in February, and we were very optimistic at that point. Obviously, we had over 40% growth in the months of January and February. So our projections at that point in time were pretty optimistic. As we usually do, we met with the commercial air carriers in February and looked at our budget plans, looked at our planned capital expenditures, and reached agreement on new rates and charges for the coming year. So that would be landing fees and their rental rates and common use rates for the commercial carriers. And then, of course, we did have an opportunity to meet with members of the budget subcommittee in early March to talk about the budget proposal. And as we would typically do, submitted the preliminary budget to city finance in early March. And then, of course, the world changed. Mid-March, we began to feel the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Strikes me that around Friday, the 13th of March was when we started to open our eyes to what was beginning to happen. And the full impact, of course, hit our airport as well as the entire aviation system by mid-April. So around the 16th to the 20th of April, most every airport in the country had lost about 96% of its passenger traffic. Next slide. So this is the first of a number of pivots that we took with regard to the budget process. But of course, we were at such a place with the budget that our city administrator directed us to really not toss the baby out with the bathwater, as they say, but to really take a look at the budget that we had and reassess to the best of our ability our budget projections. Now, granted, this is April, and any projections we had at that point in time were likely to be fairly doomsday in that scenario. We kind of looked at where we were with the passenger traffic, and we frankly didn't feel reason to be quite very optimistic at all about what was likely to happen. Of course, I should say that we did not at that point anticipate the duration of this event, but we did certainly appreciate the severity of it at that point in time. Then something that was completely unprecedented happened, and that was that Congress granted airports around the country funding through the CARES Act. And Santa Barbara was awarded a $9.5 million grant. We didn't necessarily agree with the formula for which they calculated that grant, which we did express to the FAA. But nonetheless, we were grateful for that $9.5 million that we were awarded. Certainly that nothing that happened in conjunction with other severe events to aviation, such as the 9/11 attacks or the recession back in 2008. So this was a fantastic thing that actually happened, very unprecedented. The funds that were provided by the federal government, they were very unique in terms of grant funding, because they were really specifically intended to support revenue shortfalls. And that is what was happening at airports. Obviously, we were losing passenger traffic and all of the revenue streams that were associated with that passenger traffic. And then, of course, debt service costs. It was very important to the federal government that airports were able to remain solvent. Now, one of the things that we did, which was, I think, one of the best things that we really did in conjunction with this, was to look at the CARES Act funding, appreciate the fact of how unprecedented it was, and make a plan for how to use that funding in the wisest way possible. And that was, again, looking forward and anticipating that perhaps the recovery would not be as robust or as swift as we would hope. So we made a plan for using that funding over a 2-year period in order to assure that we could make our debt service payments and that we could replace revenues in the event that they did not immediately return. So that is actually what we are in the midst of implementing at this point in time. So next slide. So again, we had to make some very swift budget adjustments, and we essentially looked at the very short term, which was the fourth quarter of the last fiscal year, March through June, and really looked at, in the worst case scenario, what we thought would happen to airport revenues. We obviously saw what was happening on the commercial aviation side, but we also looked at our commercial properties as well for potential revenue impact. Also, the 6100 Hollister loan, we determined that the wisest course of action was to repay that loan for a number of reasons. One, because the revenue stream from 6100 Hollister really appeared to be very stable. And so if we could retain those revenues from those rents, that made a lot of sense to us, as opposed to sending all of those revenues towards the debt service on that loan. Obviously, we could also reduce the interest costs associated with that loan. And importantly, the city, which was not a benefactor of CARES Act funding, was really in need of the liquidity that repaying that loan meant to the city. So it was sort of a win-win situation for both the city and the airport. And then, of course, we use that funding to make our biannual terminal debt service payment. And then, of course, in addition to looking at the revenue side, we looked at the discretionary cost side. We'll talk a little bit about how our flexibility is pretty limited when it comes to expenses and spending, but nonetheless, we looked at where we could cut funding for programs that were not absolutely essential towards the end of the fiscal year. So next slide. So our year-end performance, as you can see here, as contrasted with our revised budget and how things actually turned out. We still managed to balance our budget. Obviously, we used nearly half of the CARES Act award to replace lost revenue, but we also reduced spending. And as you can note there on that slide, we were able to pay back the general fund loan. So ultimately, with cost savings and the additional funding, we were able to stabilize our year-end performance for the year 2020. Next slide. As I said before, I think we've gone actually backwards a slide. We use the 4.5 there. Okay, I think we're going back the opposite direction. One more forward. There we go. All right, so budget adjustments. So for the coming budget year, so FY 2021, again, we engaged in an exercise to try to anticipate the revenue losses, primarily again associated with the loss in passenger traffic. And we developed a plan for reducing our costs in 2021 that both on the expense side, but also on the capital cost side, which we'll talk just a little bit later, but in total $2.6 million in anticipated reductions for the coming year's budget. Next slide. All right, obviously with everything that was going on in the industry, there was a lot of curiosity, I would say beyond curiosity, a lot of inquiries from the airlines as to what we were using our CARES Act funding for. So there was a lot of communication back and forth with the airlines. We also communicated obviously with the off-calendar memos, et cetera, to the commission about our revised projected revenues, our spending plan, our reductions in spending, and what we were doing with the CARES Act. And in May, we presented virtually, as with everything else that has taken place since the pandemic started, our revised budget for the City Council for approval. And it was approved. Next slide. So since then, and really since this started, our team has worked in real time to try to evaluate the trend for this event for aviation. Obviously, it's a community-wide event, but the implications for the aviation industry have been particularly severe. There's really no reliable script for how this recovery is taking place. It doesn't match the recovery from previous events. The only thing that we feel confident about is that there will be a recovery, and it will likely take us 2, 3, 4 years maybe to make a recovery towards our passenger levels from 2019. But we have solid finances today, and we believe that with guarded optimism, we can count on this recovery. So as I've mentioned a few times now, commercial aviation, that is where the recovery really needs to take place. As Henry said, we're operating right now with a 70% reduction roughly in commercial airline traffic, which affects all of the revenue streams associated with that. So we need that recovery to happen, and that is critical for our ability to maintain our ability to operate moving forward. Next slide. All right. As I've mentioned also, part of this vigilance with the budget is in recognition of the fact that we have a mandate to maintain commercial air service and all of our other services in the same secure and safe fashion as we usually do. And what that means is that most of our expenses are fixed. And that was obviously a realization early on, top to bottom, when we're looking at the budget, where we realized just how many things in our budget really are not something that we have the flexibility to touch or to change. So a lot of the obligations we have are related to our regulated obligations, our debt service, and then of course, sometimes it is necessary to be able to spend some money in order to preserve our revenue potential. So, preserving our cash flows is a very important thing. And sometimes we're required to continue investing in order to make sure that we continue those revenue flows. So next slide. All right, so our status now for this particular year, 2021, of course, we have a remaining $5 million roughly in CARES Act funding to claim off of that grant. And so we will be using that to support our October 2020 debt service payment. And of course, we will use that funding to replace other reductions in revenue. The primary objective, obviously, is to avoid staffing impacts, because staffing is, of course, key to how we perform our mission safely and securely here at the airport. Now, it is correct that our revenues for Q1 of the fiscal year are underperforming. And that is, again, primarily due to the impacts and the trickle-down effects from commercial air service. I'm happy to report, though, that our commercial rent side of the house is tracking largely with our projections. We haven't had a lot of payment issues on that side of the house. Folks have been able to make their rent payments. So, and of course, the FAA has been more generous with some of their grant funding for our capital projects, where we will not necessarily be required to come up with the typical grant match for capital projects. And then finally, to report that there is a possibility that there will be additional funding from Congress. We know that right now, of course, we're just ahead of election time. And so there's a lot of distractions in Washington. But actually, the last federal funding package that was presented by the Republican side recently did include another $10 billion for airports. It's just that that particular package has not gotten traction yet. So there's reason to be somewhat optimistic that there may be some additional funding from Congress in the future, but we're going to have to wait. So next slide. All right, so as I mentioned, we have made reductions in this year's operating budget. We reduced our operating spending by $875,000. Our capital budget reduced by $1.8 million. That is primarily in the delay of construction on the South Field project. Design is moving forward, but the construction will be delayed. So this is really just part of responsibly managing our budget in a period of uncertainty. We don't know exactly how this recovery is going to play out. It has thus far been slower than we anticipated. So we are planning on the conservative side for that recovery. And of course, a key part of that is the CARES Act allocation of the essentially half of that grant being allocated to this year's budget. Next slide. All right, just to give you a sense of on the commercial airline side, some of the impacts that we have dealt with. The airline carriers very early on asked for some deferred payments of rents and landing fees. As it turned out, they actually were able to make more of those payments, and they did make more of those payments than we initially were fearful of. And they are now largely current on those at this point in time. So in that sense, I think it did not quite play out as severely as we had feared that it might. However, the passenger facility charge revenues, those are exactly tied to passenger levels. So if we are down 70% in passengers, our PFC revenues are also impacted. And those funds, as you may recall, are the funds that we use ordinarily to support our debt service. Our rental car companies, that is an example of a revenue stream that is impacted by passenger numbers. Our largest rental car company, Hertz, is currently in bankruptcy proceedings, but they are continuing as part of the bankruptcy to make their payments since they actually filed for bankruptcy protection. So that is sort of a wait and see, operating at reduced levels, but we are seeing payments from them. Our airport food and beverage operation is probably like restaurants on the street, been the most severely impacted. That's no different than anywhere else. The pre-security cafe closed in March, has not reopened. The full service restaurant has had to deal with a number of changes of being open, not being open, the bar is open, the bar is not open, the seating is open, the seating is not open, takeout, et cetera, et cetera. So they've had to be pretty nimble in adjusting their menu, most certainly, to accommodate passengers who are perhaps taking food on the plane, as opposed to being able to eat it in the restaurant. They have requested a temporary reduction in their percentage rent simply due to the loss of passengers. And that's quite understandable. As with everything else, costs don't necessarily go away, but in this case, their revenues from passengers has diminished greatly. So next slide. On a daily basis, we scrutinize our expenses, making sure that the money that we are spending and need to spend is going towards things that are absolutely essential. We're continually tracking our revenues. That's probably the place of the greatest focus, is to make sure that the revenues are coming in, and if they're not coming in, why they're not coming in. We did actually offer the city eviction moratorium, the TMO ordinance, the rent deferral to tenants who requested it. And as it turned out, we did not have any tenants that took advantage of that. And the reason for that is either they did not see the revenue losses that they perhaps feared in the very beginning, or they were benefactors of the government assistance small business association loans, the PPP loans, that in quite a few cases, they were assisted by that. So as far as our staffing levels go, we do have a number of positions that remained vacant. We also have other positions that are being staffed by hourly staff at reduced levels than if they were to be filled by permanent full-time employees. So we are, as we usually do, achieving some savings on the salary side. It's not really sustainable in every case. And as Henry mentioned, especially on the budget side, we are still very short staffed. So some of these positions we will need to fill eventually, but we're monitoring that very, very closely. All right. Next slide. I believe that is the presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have at this point.
Go ahead, Commissioner Curry.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Deanna, for that comprehensive report and rehash of information you've given us. A couple of things. I've got three quick things, and then I'll end. Nobody's less stressed. Nobody's more happy during the COVID crisis. And oh, by the way, there's a global recession, social and civil issues that are tearing at the national fabric, turmoil, an election cycle, fires, floods, and other calamities. What a year. You folks that are charged with maintaining the operations through all of this, being short-staffed, having the FAA and TSA as partners along the way, and I don't say that sarcastically, completely, and that we operate the airport without costing the taxpayers money. I feel compelled to say on behalf of the residents of Santa Barbara and the local area, Henry and your staff, and Henry, no offense to you, I'm going to give more of the thanks to the hardworking staff behind the scenes to keep this thing on track financially under what is conditions that have no precedent in our ability to measure. So I think you've done a spectacular job, a phenomenal job. I thank you for that. Second, I realize that wasn't a question, but there is a question here. Second, staffing wise, you know, we have to think, airports have to think 10, 20 years in the future. So this too will pass, hopefully soon. But I hope from a staffing perspective, we don't take a penny wise and pound foolish or too short-term of an approach. We've lost some very, very key people, including Tom, but others of recent. And I hope we take advantage of the fact that there may be candidates out there who this opportunity to recruit them might actually be in better condition than normal. So I hope we don't slow down on that. Henry, are we hiring, or I'm sorry, Deanna, have we frozen hiring, or are we just doing it selectively?
So there-
Commissioner Curry, well, we have, in kind with the city, there's been hiring for key positions. So I think when they characterize it as a hiring chill, that's probably a fair characterization. I will say, with regard to the budget position, we actually did try to recruit for that position back in January, when the world was different, and we were unsuccessful in recruiting a candidate at that point in time. So we are actually in the midst of a second recruitment effort for that position, and we're hoping that we will have a more fruitful marketplace this time around.
Okay, thanks. And then lastly, I'm very supportive of any help we can give the post-security restaurant, because being one of those few people who are still traveling on the airlines, now that the airlines have reduced food service down to a cracker, it's really handy to be able to grab food before you board. So really, for the traveling public that is traveling, any help we can give those folks is certainly appreciated. You folks all have my sincere gratitude for your hard work.
Any other questions or comments by commissioners? Commissioner Bowen.
Thank you. And I would like to second that to Deanna and all the staff people that worked to put this together. Thank you. I see it as a vital thing for airport commissioners to keep their nose in the budget. It's that high level function that I sincerely hope that all future airport commissioners will continue to do. On the CARES Act, do we have any restrictions on that money?
Commissioner Henry, would you like to address that question perhaps?
Sure, I will. Actually, there's a lot more flexibility in the use of those funds. The FAA basically has explained that those funds can be used for any legal purpose that we normally expend our funds for. So they gave a really wide flexibility in the use of those funds. Here, we made a conscious decision to focus the use of those funds on debt service and on operating expense. And we felt that was the wisest use given, the projected shortage in revenues we were looking at.
Okay, thank you for that. That sounds very good. And there were so many different new bits in the budget presentation. I learned a lot, thanks. One of them was the line that said there was reduced rent being offered. Was that was for the restaurant, I believe?
Excuse me, Commissioner, could you repeat that question? I didn't quite catch it.
I'm sorry. In your slides, I thought I saw one of them that said there was an offer of reduced rent or a request for reduced rent was that for the restaurant at the airport?
Yes, Commissioner Bowen, that's correct. So the restaurant at the airport, they pay us a percentage of their gross sales. And so they have essentially requested as of a couple of weeks ago, actually, to temporarily reduce the percentage that they pay to the airport while our passenger numbers are as low as they are. So we're engaged in a financial analysis at this point of what the impact to the airport would be, but we certainly understand the difficulties that restaurant has faced, particularly with the changing conditions and, essentially having to change their menu several times over, and with staffing and schedule changes. That's been very difficult. As you know, the airline schedules periodically have been very, very unreliable. So, their cost of goods sold has not necessarily been terribly efficient all the time. So we're taking a very close look at that. to see what is reasonable. That's a phenomenon that, of course, is taking place all over the country. And concessionaires all over the country are also trying to receive relief from Congress, as most every business is that's associated with aviation.
Okay, thank you for your very good explanation. I don't mean to micromanage you. I'm quite sure you know what you're doing with property management. But it was one of the many bits of new information on the budget that I just wanted to hear more information about. Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Any other commissioners have questions? I have one. When we saw the original budget back in, what was it, February? I believe it was based on an assumption of 1.2 million enplanements. We had, if I recall right, come just short of 1 million enplanements in the prior fiscal year, the prior calendar year, I guess it was. And so we were looking at 1.2 for the current year. So the question is sort of twofold. What is the current estimate for enplanements for this year based on where we are so far? And what does the budget, as you currently have it, require without additional either revenue increases from elsewhere or expense decreases?
Well, Commissioner Hopkins, I'll try to answer that question as best I can. At the point in time when we were making the enplanement assumptions, of course, back in April, and of course we've continued to monitor those, we felt like a conservative estimate for the entire fiscal year might be a 50% loss of passengers. And so essentially we've sort of continued to stick around that, somewhere around what we saw in 2017 numbers, somewhere around 365,000 enplanements, somewhere around in that area. And then really what we've tried to do is look to see where the revenue streams or how the revenue streams are tracking with enplanements, because that's kind of the key thing to see, and really making sure that none of our revenue streams like airport parking, rental cars, food and beverage concessions is a little bit different, but primarily rental cars and parking, to make sure that they are still tracking with enplanements as opposed to tracking in worse than enplanements. And so far we are seeing tracking with enplanements, which seems to be a good, healthy sign for us.
Good. Thank you very much. If there are no more commissioner questions or comments, Maureen, please open it up for public comment.
Members of the public, if you wish to comment on this item, would you please use the raised hand icon on your screen to let me know you wish to speak? We have a dwindling group that are with us. Chair Khan, I do not see any raised hand icons.
Thank you very much. That I will close public comment. That concludes that item. Just before we adjourn, very quickly, are there any other final comments, questions, or requests for items on next month's agenda from the commissioners?
Mr. Hopkins, before we close, I just really wanted to give a shout out to Tracy Fouch and Tracy Kelly on the staff here at the airport, who have really carried the lion's share of the budget work, of course, in close collaboration with Henry. So it's done a fantastic job. A lot of hard work.
Thank you very much. And at that, we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. The next meeting is scheduled for October 21st, 2020 at 6 p.m., most likely conducted in the same manner. Good night.